The flag cracked in the wind as Walt Disney pledged family values, hours before betraying his own animators to the FBI. Behind velvet curtains, Joan Crawford hoarded blackmail like crown jewels, while Errol Flynn's mansion hid sins too dark to print. These weren't fairy tales, but Hollywood's forbidden ledger. 17 corrupt stars who traded morals for money, proving fame's glow was bought with shadows, and stars who traded their souls for the glitter of fame. Number 1. Walt Disney, the patriot who betrayed his own. The flag snapped in the California wind as Walt Disney stood proudly before his animators, promising them a family studio built on imagination and American values. What they didn't know was that just hours later, he would slip into a quiet office, hand-deliver names to federal agents, and turn their livelihoods into bargaining chips. The man who gave children Mickey Mouse was also feeding colleagues to the blacklist machine. By the early 1940s, Disney's empire was wobbling. The 1941 animators' strike had bled his studio of talent, bitterly dividing those who had once worshipped him as a visionary. Publicly, Walt painted the strike as the work of ungrateful employees manipulated by outside agitators. Privately, he seethed. When the FBI came knocking, Walt saw not just a patriotic duty, but a golden opportunity to crush dissent and regain total control. Declassified files later revealed his code name, S1. From 1941 onward, he served as a confidential informant, supplying names of animators, writers, and union organizers he branded un-American. Many were not revolutionaries at all, just men and women who had once dared to demand credit or fair pay. Yet Disney's reports carried weight. Careers vanished overnight. Artists who had sketched Snow White's delicate features or Pinocchio's honest eyes found themselves unemployable, branded as enemies of the state. The irony was staggering. Walt, the supposed guardian of wholesome American innocence, used the same government machinery meant to protect democracy as his personal enforcement arm. Before the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1947, he named former employees in public testimony, smiling thinly as he cloaked personal vendettas in patriotic rhetoric. What the newspapers did not print was that many of those men had once stood across the picket line from him during the strike, demanding the profits he hoarded. The myth of Disney as America's great storyteller endures. His castle gleams at the center of childhood dreams. Yet, in smoky back rooms, his hand was guiding federal files, ensuring rivals were silenced and his empire unchallenged. He wrapped revenge in the American flag, leaving a legacy as chilling as it was dazzling. And if Disney could bend patriotism itself into a weapon, the next star wielded secrets like daggers, turning Hollywood into her private kingdom of blackmail. Number 2. Joan Crawford, Hollywood's blackmail queen. The lights of MGM's commissary glittered like a stage, but Joan Crawford wasn't dining. She was listening. Fork in hand, she leaned closer as a careless producer whispered about his late-night indiscretions. By dessert, the secret was hers, and before long, it would be tucked into the private files she guarded more jealously than her Oscars. Born Lucille Le Sueur, she clawed her way out of the Texas dust to the bright marquees of the 1920s. But Crawford didn't just dance her way into stardom. She schemed her way into power. Behind the flapper smile and shimmering gowns, she kept a growing arsenal of evidence. Letters, photographs, whispered confessions from drunken parties. By the 1930s, Joan had turned blackmail into an art form, wielding it with the same precision others used in rehearsed lines. When her career stumbled in the late Depression years, Crawford struck back with the weapon no rival could fight. The coveted role of Mildred Pierce in 1945, the one that resurrected her career and crowned her with an Academy Award, was never meant for her. Barbara Stanwyck had been the first choice, until suddenly, mysteriously, she withdrew. Years later, whispers traced the withdrawal back to Crawford's threat to expose a forbidden affair that would have destroyed Stanwyck in conservative America. Columnists adored her at cocktail parties, but not because they loved her wit. Joan fed them stories, damaging little tales about starlets rising too fast, about Marilyn Monroe's fragile nerves, or a director's wandering eye. The gossip would make print days later, timed perfectly to keep rivals off balance while Crawford's name stayed steady on studio rosters. Even her lovers weren't safe. Directors seduced by her allure soon found themselves under her control. "Cast me, or I'll tell your wife," was a phrase whispered in shadows. The velvet threat no man could ignore. By the time her star dimmed in the 1950s, Crawford had accumulated a private archive of Hollywood's sins so vast that even studio heads tread carefully around her. To the world, she was the immaculate star of Grand Hotel and Mildred Pierce. But in the locked drawers of her home lay the real reason Joan Crawford never truly faded: a paper empire built on other people's shame. Number 3. Errol Flynn. Dashing hero. Sinister predator. The velvet curtains parted at Grauman's Chinese Theater, and the crowd gasped as Errol Flynn appeared on screen, sword raised, the perfect swashbuckler. But behind the applause, whispers followed him like shadows. Whispers of parties no one dared describe in print, and secrets Warner Brothers spent fortunes to bury. Flynn burst onto the Hollywood scene in 1935 with Captain Blood, his grin and blade making him the face of reckless adventure. But off-camera, he treated life as another conquest. His Beverly Hills mansion, mockingly nicknamed Cirrhosis by the Sea, was fitted with two-way mirrors and hidden passageways, turning gatherings into voyeuristic traps. Guests often left unsettled, sensing the host had taken far more than their company. In 1942, scandal struck in the open. Flynn faced trial, accused of exploiting 2 teenage girls. The newspapers splashed the story in bold type, and Hollywood braced for collapse. Yet Warner Brothers went to war, not for justice, but for their box office star. Private investigators smeared the accusers. Evidence mysteriously vanished, and the courtroom circus ended with acquittal. Flynn walked free, but the trial etched a phrase into American slang: "In like Flynn." To fans, it meant charm. To insiders, it meant corruption. The darker stories only multiplied. His yacht, the Sirocco, became infamous. Whispers spoke of floating parties, where escape was impossible until Flynn returned to shore. A former Warner security man later revealed the studio maintained a permanent cleanup crew dedicated solely to Flynn's escapades. If trouble loomed, a contract appeared, a payoff was arranged, or the offending voice was silenced. Even his closest friends sensed the rot beneath the charm. Actor David Niven once remarked, "You always knew where you stood with Errol Flynn. He always let you down." By the time Flynn died in 1959, at only 50, his body ravaged by liquor, sedatives, and untreated illness, Hollywood was left grappling with a legacy it could neither erase nor comfortably honor. On screen, he swung from chandeliers, the embodiment of heroism. Off-screen, he prowled through shadows, a reminder that the line between dashing icon and sinister predator could vanish with the closing of a studio door. Number 4. Charlie Chaplin, the beloved tramp with dark allegiances. The cane twirled, the bowler hat tipped, and audiences roared as Charlie Chaplin's little tramp shuffled across the silent screen. But while the world adored his childlike innocence, behind the camera, Chaplin was orchestrating a life steeped in control, betrayal, and alliances that would ultimately exile him from the country that made him a legend. Chaplin's rise from vaudeville stages to Hollywood's biggest star in the 1910s was meteoric. By the 1920s, his name rivaled presidents and kings, but power revealed his darkest instincts. Actresses who resisted his advances found their roles slashed in editing rooms, their scenes declared unnecessary. Behind closed doors, Chaplin favored companions barely out of girlhood, molding them into pliant figures he could dominate. His second wife, Lita Gray, only a teen when he married her, later recalled contracts so grotesque that lawyers quietly paid her a fortune to keep their contents sealed. Even in business, corruption thrived. Chaplin, though musically illiterate, took full credit for scores written by professional composers, paying them one-time fees while claiming authorship on classics like City Lights. The mask of genius concealed theft as brazen as any studio swindle. By the 1940s, his private scandals collided with politics. The infamous paternity suit of 1943 exposed courtroom tampering, bribed witnesses, and a campaign to smear an actress who challenged him. Though blood tests cleared him, Chaplin was ordered to pay support anyway, a humiliation amplified by gossip columnists who reveled in every sordid detail. Then came the whispers of ideology. FBI files revealed contributions to organizations branded as Soviet-friendly during the height of Cold War paranoia. While Chaplin insisted he was merely a humanist, officials believed he was funneling money and influence toward causes aligned with America's enemies. The Attorney General took extraordinary action. In 1952, as Chaplin traveled to London for the premiere of Limelight, his re-entry permit was revoked. Hollywood's most famous clown was banished, left to grow old in Swiss exile. Audiences still picture the tramp waddling off into the sunset, yet in the shadows, Chaplin walked a different road, one lined with discarded collaborators, silenced lovers, and a trail of allegiances America could no longer forgive. Number 5. Clark Gable, the king who got away with murder. The headlights cut through the foggy Los Angeles night in 1933, and with a sickening thud, a man lay broken in the street. Witnesses swore the driver staggered from the car, shaken, smelling of liquor. But by the time police arrived, the man behind the wheel, Clark Gable, Hollywood's Golden King, was nowhere to be found. MGM's most valuable asset could not be left to the mercy of the law. Studio fixer Eddie Mannix was dispatched within minutes. Another employee, a young screen hand, was ordered to take Gable's place as the culprit. The boy was sent on an extended vacation to Europe, his pockets lined with hush money, while the real driver returned to the safety of the studio lot. The pedestrian's death barely made the papers. For MGM, protecting Rhett Butler was worth more than protecting truth. Gable's charm on screen masked a ruthless arrogance off it. On the set of Gone with the Wind, Vivien Leigh endured his constant sabotage after she spurned his advances. He demanded retakes, whispered complaints to producers, and left her in tears while audiences later swooned over their fiery romance. Gossip columnists of the era, Hedda Hopper among them, hinted at the king's temper, but MGM's publicity machine drowned such whispers in glossy photographs and staged interviews. Even Gable's wartime service carried the scent of stagecraft. After enlisting in 1942, he was quickly promoted and given a camera crew to film his missions. Pentagon memos later revealed the truth. His flights were carefully managed, keeping him safe while earning medals that burnished his patriotic image. America believed its idol had braved German skies, while insiders knew the danger was mostly manufactured. Perhaps the most damning whispers came when compromising photographs surfaced of Gable in intimate company with a male MGM executive. Mannix quietly paid $25,000, nearly $400,000 today, to recover the negatives. The photographer soon vanished from California altogether. Number 6. John Wayne, America's hero built on lies. The desert winds whipped across Utah's Red Canyons in 1956 as cameras rolled on the conqueror. John Wayne, dressed as Genghis Khan, barked orders with his booming voice. What the cast didn't know was that the dust clinging to their costumes carried invisible poison. Radioactive fallout drifting from Nevada test sites. Wayne had been warned, but the cameras rolled anyway. By then, Wayne was the face of American masculinity. His films for Republic and later Warner Brothers sold not just box office tickets, but patriotism itself. Yet when Atomic Energy Commission officials quietly flagged the filming location as contaminated, Wayne ignored the risks. He had already invested too much in the production. Rather than relocate, he pressed on, insisting the danger was exaggerated. Years later, the toll became undeniable. Nearly half the crew, including Wayne himself, developed cancer. The Duke's silence had condemned dozens. His contradictions stretched further. During World War II, Wayne thundered across screens as the embodiment of battlefield courage. Off-screen, he secured a deferment, citing family responsibilities. While younger actors with wives and children, like Jimmy Stewart, flew real combat missions over Europe, Wayne stayed behind, building his stardom on fictional wars. Studio publicity painted him as a soldier of the screen, while the truth sat buried in Pentagon files. Even his anti-communist crusade in the late 1940s rang with hypocrisy. Wayne thundered against un-American elements in Hollywood, yet protected certain left-leaning colleagues when it suited his productions. Principle never outweighed profit. A lighting technician or screenwriter deemed indispensable could quietly keep their job, so long as they kept Wayne's films on schedule. The image America adored, stalwart, uncompromising, pure, was as carefully manufactured as a Republic Pictures press kit. Behind the swagger was a man who traded truth for profit and safety for convenience. And when the Duke finally succumbed to cancer in 1979, many whispered it wasn't just fate that claimed him, but the radioactive desert he once dismissed. The star who embodied America's courage had built his legend on fragile lies, leaving behind a shadow darker than any frontier. Number 7. Jean Harlow, blonde bombshell with blood on her hands. The scream rang out across Benedict Canyon in 1932. Neighbors rushing to the mansion where MGM star Jean Harlow lived with her new husband, producer Paul Byrne. Minutes later, Byrne's body was discovered, slumped in the bedroom, a revolver neatly placed by his side, and a note too perfect, too staged to feel real. Hollywood's official story was swift. Byrne had taken his own life, humiliated by physical inadequacy. Gossip columnists Hedda Hopper and Lowella Parsons splashed the narrative across their columns, feeding a stunned public. But whispers inside MGM told another tale, that Harlow's domineering mother and stepfather, both deeply entangled in her finances, saw Byrne as a threat to their control. The inconsistencies were glaring. Byrne's body bore marks of a struggle. The gun was free of fingerprints, and the angle of the wound made self-infliction nearly impossible. Witnesses swore they saw Harlow near a gas station close to the mansion that night, contradicting her claim of being miles away. Those witnesses vanished on sudden vacations, courtesy of MGM fixers like Eddie Mannix and Howard Strickling. Studio men arrived before the police, removing diaries and documents that might have explained too much. For MGM, protecting their platinum-haired star was worth any distortion. Harlow was box office gold in films like Red-Headed Woman and Dinner at 8. A scandal tying her to murder, or even knowledge of it, could ruin more than just a career. It could unravel the illusion of Hollywood glamour itself. The cover-up was total, and Byrne was reduced to a pitiful caricature in the press, his name synonymous with shame, while Harlow's reputation gleamed brighter than ever. But beneath the sequins and studio gloss, tragedy clung to her. Just 5 years later, Harlow collapsed on the set of Saratoga. Dead at only 26, she took with her whatever she truly knew about that night in Benedict Canyon. Number 8. Wallace Reid, Hollywood's first addiction sacrifice. The cameras rolled on a blazing California rail yard in 1919. Smoke curling around Wallace Reid as he leapt from a moving train for the climax of the Valley of the Giants. The stunt went wrong. He was crushed beneath steel and timber. Writhing in pain, he begged for a pause to heal. Instead, the studio doctor appeared with a syringe. "Get him back on set," the producer barked. The injection dulled the agony, but it chained him to a secret torment that would end his life. By the early 1920s, Reid was the screen's perfect lover, adored in fan magazines and plastered across Paramount publicity stills. His matinee idol smile filled theaters, and women mailed thousands of love letters each week. What audiences never knew was that, behind the glamour, Paramount had turned their brightest star into an addict to keep films on schedule. The accident had left him crippled with injuries, but downtime meant lost profits. Each morning, Reid was handed another vial, another carefully measured treatment that blurred his pain long enough to get through takes. If he dared ask for rest, the supply stopped, plunging him into agony until he obeyed. Gossip columnists whispered that he had grown erratic, that makeup artists struggled to mask the sweat beading across his face. Paramount brushed it off as exhaustion from overwork, never admitting the truth. Their golden boy was being kept alive by chemistry. As the years passed, the mask slipped. Reid collapsed between scenes, trembling hands barely able to hold props. His once bright eyes dulled, his body wasting away before horrified colleagues. In 1922, he collapsed on set for the final time and was quietly sent to a sanitarium. The studio spun the story as a nervous condition, but the reality was far darker. In January 1923, Wallace Reid was dead at just 31. Hollywood wept, yet Paramount carried on, quietly writing clauses that gave them even greater control over medical treatments. Reid's widow later called him the industry's first sacrificial lamb, a man consumed so that cameras never stopped rolling. And while Reid's death exposed medicine as a weapon, the next star twisted wit itself into a tool for corruption. Number 9. Mae West, the siren who stole every line. The laughter roared through the Paramount lot as Mae West purred, "Come up and see me sometime." But in the smoky parlor where the line was first spoken, it hadn't been hers at all. It belonged to a young writer who would never receive credit. His wit stolen and immortalized under Mae's name. West's rise in the 1930s was built on her curves and quick tongue. Yet behind the wisecracks was a pattern of ruthless theft. She lured struggling writers, often young men on the margins, into her apartment with promises of mentorship. Over champagne and flattery, they spilled their sharpest one-liners. The next morning, Mae would jot them down in her notebook, ready to deliver them on stage or set. When they protested, they found doors mysteriously closed, their names whispered as difficult. In Hollywood's tight-knit system, that was a death sentence. Her targets were often those least able to fight back. Gay writers, criminalized and silenced in that era, were especially vulnerable. To accuse Mae meant exposing themselves to public ruin. One Paramount insider later revealed, "She preyed on men who had no voice. She made sure of it." By the mid-1930s, Mae had become Paramount's highest-paid star, earning more than the President of the United States. The studio touted her as a trailblazing feminist, a woman scripting her own success. In truth, she had built an empire out of borrowed words and broken reputations. Paramount executives knew it, but looked the other way. Her films were saving the studio from bankruptcy during the Depression. Her manipulation extended beyond scripts. Informants inside Paramount whispered to her whenever rival actresses were being considered for plum roles. A dinner with the right producer, paired with a few carefully placed rumors, was enough to sink a competitor's chances. By the 1940s, the very wit that seemed so natural was already calcified into legend. No one dared challenge its origin. Mae sat on her throne, draped in diamonds, her sharpest lines forever etched into film history. Yet beneath the sparkle lay silenced voices, ghostwriters erased by the woman who turned theft into immortality. And if Mae built her empire on stolen words, the next star would nearly topple Hollywood, with the pages of a diary too dangerous to read aloud. Number 10. Mary Astor, the Purple Diary Scandal. The courtroom fell silent in 1936, as a stack of purple leather-bound pages was placed on the judge's desk. Inside, Mary Astor's private diary revealed not just affairs, but the kind of explicit detail that could burn Hollywood's entire facade to ashes. In an era ruled by the Hays Code, where even a kiss longer than 3 seconds was deemed indecent, the diary threatened to expose what the studios fought hardest to hide: that their stars lived lives wilder than any picture on screen. Astor, already acclaimed for films like Dodsworth, was fighting a vicious custody battle with her ex-husband, Dr. Franklin Thorpe. He held the diary like a loaded gun. Its entries documented trysts with playwright George S. Kaufman, poetically described with a candor that made even hardened gossip columnists blush. But more dangerously, the pages hinted at encounters with producers, directors, and power brokers, men whose reputations were worth millions to the studios they ran. Warner Brothers panicked. If the diary became public, it would not only destroy Astor, but drag half the town into scandal. Rumors swirled that studio fixers descended on the courthouse, greasing palms and leaning on judges to keep the contents sealed. Hedda Hopper teased her readers with sly hints, promising that the Little Purple Book contained enough material to shut down Hollywood Boulevard. Behind the scenes, Astor's lawyers argued that the diary was inadmissible. The court agreed, and the book was locked away, its most damning passages never read aloud. Still, enough gossip leaked to permanently brand her in the public imagination. She continued acting, even winning an Academy Award for The Great Lie in 1941, but the shadow of that diary followed her onto every set. In private, colleagues whispered about what else those purple pages contained: names never printed, meetings never documented. When Astor died in 1987, the diary had long since disappeared, rumored to have been destroyed by hands too nervous to let its secrets resurface. Audiences remember Mary Astor as the enigmatic femme fatale of The Maltese Falcon. But for those who knew the whispers, she was the woman whose diary nearly pulled Hollywood's golden mask to the floor. And if Astor's scandal was hidden between leather covers, the next star's corruption spilled in blood across a Beverly Hills floor. Number 11. Lana Turner, the sweater girl who protected a killer. The scream shattered the quiet of a Beverly Hills mansion on a spring night in 1958. When police arrived, they found mobster Johnny Stompanato sprawled on the carpet, a kitchen knife buried deep in his chest. In the doorway stood Lana Turner, trembling, while her teenage daughter Cheryl clutched the handle. To the outside world, it looked like a child's desperate act of protection. But to insiders, it was the perfect cover for a scandal that could have ended Lana's reign overnight. Turner had risen from a chance discovery at a Hollywood soda fountain to become MGM's shimmering sweater girl. Her curves and beauty-fueling hits like "The Postman Always Rings Twice." Yet behind the glamour, her private life was consumed by abusive relationships. None darker than her entanglement with Stompanato, a small-time enforcer for gangster Mickey Cohen. He beat her, shadowed her film sets, and threatened her co-stars. Rumors swirled that he had compromising photographs, evidence he could use to blackmail the studio if Turner tried to break free. On April 4, 1958, the nightmare climaxed. After yet another fight, Cheryl allegedly rushed into the room and stabbed Stompanato in the chest. The court ruled it justifiable homicide, citing self-defense. The newspapers wept for the innocent child who saved her mother. But whispers persisted that Cheryl was only a pawn, and that Lana herself had wielded the knife in a moment of fury. MGM had too much to lose. Their leading lady could not be branded a killer. With the help of fixers, the narrative was sealed. Cheryl, the tragic heroine; Lana, the grieving mother. Columnists like Hedda Hopper spun the story as a tale of survival. But behind closed doors, agents and publicists worked tirelessly to smother the darker suspicions. Stompanato's underworld ties guaranteed silence. Few dared to question the official version too loudly. Turner even parlayed the scandal into career revival, earning acclaim for Imitation of Life the following year. To fans, she remained the dazzling sweater girl who had suffered tragedy. To Hollywood insiders, she was the woman who walked away from a bloody living room floor untouched, her studio reputation guarded more fiercely than the truth. Number 12. Elia Kazan, Betrayal on Cuke. The camera lights burned hot in 1952 as Elia Kazan, director of A Streetcar Named Desire, raised his hand before Congress. With the calm authority of a man calling action on set, he began naming names, friends, colleagues, and former allies, feeding them to the House Un-American Activities Committee, while the press scratched furiously at their notepads. For some, their careers ended that very afternoon. For Kazan, it was the role of a lifetime. Betrayer dressed as patriot. Kazan had once been part of the Group Theater, a left-leaning artistic collective born out of Depression-era struggles. Around rehearsal halls in the 1930s, he spoke passionately about workers' rights and political justice. But when Hollywood's climate shifted and the FBI's gaze turned to the screen trade, those same associations became a liability. In January 1952, facing the prospect of blacklisting, Kazan accepted the bargain whispered by studio heads. Testify, and you'll keep your camera. Refuse, and you'll never direct again. His testimony named 8 former colleagues, people with whom he had built his career. Their lives collapsed into ruin, yet within weeks, Kazan was rewarded with fresh contracts from 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers, each studio eager to show Washington they could keep their stars clean. The betrayal echoed beyond the hearing rooms. Arthur Miller, once Kazan's close friend, severed ties, later writing The Crucible as a coded indictment of his cowardice. Actors whispered that Kazan could no longer be trusted, yet they still lined up for auditions, because working with him meant survival. Even Marlon Brando, torn by disgust, followed him into On the Waterfront, a film that became Kazan's public defense. Its plot mirrored his own justification, a man informing against his corrupt comrades in the name of truth. But in smoky bars along Sunset Boulevard, the joke circulated that Kazan hadn't directed On the Waterfront at all. He had merely filmed his confession. The Academy gave him statues. The government gave him safety. His colleagues gave him only silence, broken by the sound of careers crumbling in his wake. Number 13. Louis B. Mayer, the crime boss of MGM. The polished marble floors of MGM's executive suite gleamed like a cathedral, but everyone who walked them knew they belonged not to a studio head, but to a kingpin. Louis B. Mayer, the man who built Hollywood's most glamorous dream factory, ruled less like a producer and more like a mob boss, dispensing favors, crushing enemies, and enforcing loyalty with fixers who worked in shadows. At the height of the 1930s, MGM glittered with stars: Garbo, Gable, Garland. But behind the Technicolor sheen, Mayer controlled their lives with contracts that read like chains. Judy Garland was given pep pills to keep her awake and sleeping powders to shut her down. A brutal regimen the studio's doctors enforced under Mayer's orders. When Garland collapsed in exhaustion, Mayer appeared at her bedside, stroking her hair and calling her "my little hunchback," a twisted mix of tenderness and cruelty, meant to remind her she belonged to him. He employed Eddie Mannix and Howard Strickling as his enforcers. If a star crashed a car after a night of drinking, Mannix whisked them away and paid off the victims. If a scandal threatened to reach the papers, Strickling leaned on editors, delivering alternative scoops about rival studios. Police chiefs, judges, and city councilmen were all in Mayer's pocket, rewarded with cash-stuffed envelopes or studio perks. Everything from free cars to dates, with aspiring actresses desperate for a contract. Even MGM's Academy Awards campaigns carried the stench of racketeering. Mayer pioneered the tactic of buying loyalty, hosting lavish banquets where voters were showered with gifts. It worked. MGM stars seemed to walk away with golden statues year after year, a glittering illusion carefully orchestrated from the top. Those who defied him paid dearly. Actor John Gilbert, once a romantic idol, saw his career mysteriously collapse after spurning Mayer's control. Rumors swirled that Mayer had deliberately ordered Gilbert's voice recordings sabotaged in the transition to sound, ensuring his fall from stardom. Number 14. Rock Hudson, the studio's manufactured illusion. The flashbulbs popped outside Grauman's Chinese Theater as Rock Hudson stepped from his limousine. A statuesque beauty on his arm, the crowd swooned at the image. America's most eligible bachelor, the perfect leading man. What they didn't know was that the woman on his arm was a contract arrangement, and that every smile was staged by Universal's publicity department to conceal a truth the studio considered too dangerous to reveal. Born Roy Scherer, he was remade in the late 1940s by ruthless agent Henry Wilson, who gave him a new name, new teeth, new mannerisms. Universal executives saw in him the chance to craft the ultimate screen idol. His private life, however, didn't match the image they demanded. To protect their investment, the studio built a fortress of lies around him. Reporters who sniffed too close were silenced with threats of blacklisting. Gossip columnists were bribed with scoops about other stars, ensuring Hudson's secrets stayed buried. When whispers grew too loud in 1955, Universal arranged a lavender marriage between Hudson and Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates. The wedding was splashed across fan magazines as proof of his all-American normalcy. In reality, the union was a photo opportunity, dissolved quietly once the heat subsided. Hudson himself played along, attending staged dates with actresses like Vera Ellen and Arlene Dahl. The photographs carefully distributed to Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons. Behind closed doors, he lived a life of fear, knowing discovery could destroy not only his career, but also the financial empire built on his image. Ironically, the roles that cemented his fame, romantic comedies with Doris Day, tender dramas like Magnificent Obsession, demanded he embody heterosexual perfection. Audiences wept and cheered for a love story that was never truly his. Studio doctors even monitored him closely, fearful that indiscretions might become public through scandal or illness. By the 1960s, Hudson was exhausted by the illusion, yet the machine kept him upright, smiling on red carpets, a living billboard for a lie Hollywood could never admit. Number 15. Fatty Arbuckle, the party that ended Hollywood's innocence. The jazz band blared from a suite at San Francisco's St. Francis Hotel in September 1921. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, one of silent cinema's highest-paid comedians, poured champagne as laughter rattled the walls. But by morning, a young actress lay dying. The newspapers screamed scandal, and Hollywood's golden innocence was gone forever. Arbuckle had been a box office king at Paramount, earning over $1 million a year, an unheard-of sum at the time. With his moon-shaped face and physical comedy, he was adored by families across America. Yet away from the screen, he cultivated a reputation for excess, reckless drinking, wild parties, and a taste for debauchery that grew louder with every paycheck. That September weekend, Arbuckle and his entourage rented several hotel suites for a Prohibition-era bacchanal. When actress Virginia Rappe fell gravely ill during the festivities, rumors ignited like wildfire. Gossip columnists hinted at violence, while moral reformers painted Arbuckle as the embodiment of Hollywood sin. He was arrested and charged with manslaughter. The trials, 3 in total, became national spectacles. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, clutching scandal sheets that described Arbuckle as a predator in a city of angels. Studio heads panicked, fearing a backlash that could destroy their empire. They quietly funded Arbuckle's defense while simultaneously cutting ties, desperate to save the industry's reputation. In the end, he was acquitted, the jury even issuing an apology. But it didn't matter. The public had made up its mind. Arbuckle's films were banned from most theaters. His name synonymous with corruption. Paramount buried his contracts, and newspapers declared Hollywood a den of vice in need of cleansing. The scandal directly led to the creation of the Hays Office, Hollywood's first censorship regime, which would dictate content for decades. Arbuckle's career never recovered. He wandered in obscurity, directing under pseudonyms, his once bright star extinguished by whispers he could never outrun. To fans who remembered him as the bumbling clown of the silent era, the contrast was devastating. One night of excess had cracked the illusion of innocence, and the laughter that once followed Fatty Arbuckle was replaced by suspicion. Number 16. Shirley Temple. America's darling exploited. The curls bounced under hot studio lights as Shirley Temple sang "On the Good Ship Lollipop," her dimples lighting up the screen. Off-camera, though, the little girl who carried 20th Century Fox through the Depression was enduring 16-hour workdays, endless rehearsals, and contracts that funneled her millions into the hands of parents and executives. By 1935, Temple was the most profitable star in Hollywood, outselling Clark Gable and Bing Crosby at the box office. Studios promoted her as a symbol of innocence in a world broken by breadlines and unemployment. But behind the marketing was a relentless machine. Directors demanded take after take, even when her tiny feet bled from tap shoes. When she faltered, handlers administered boosters, sugary concoctions laced with stimulants to jolt her back into cheer. Sleep came only with sedatives, an adult regimen forced upon a child. Her parents, George and Gertrude Temple, negotiated contracts that made them wealthy, while Shirley saw little of her own earnings. By law, only a fraction was protected in trust, and even that was drained before she reached adulthood. When she finally gained control of her finances at 21, she discovered her fortune had dwindled to barely $40,000. Pocket change compared to the millions she had generated for studios and sponsors. The darker exploitation came in the way her childhood was packaged for adults. Directors staged scenes that blurred innocence with suggestion. Temple dressed as a flirtatious saloon singer in baby burlesques, or paired romantically with grown men on screen, all in the name of comedy. Critics at the time were uneasy, but Fox brushed aside concerns, chasing profits from audiences who found her precocious charm irresistible. By the 1940s, Temple's appeal waned. The girl who had once propped up an entire studio was discarded before she turned 15. Her career sacrificed to a system that had drained every ounce of her childhood. America remembered Shirley Temple as its darling, the child who brought joy to the Depression. But in the shadows of Hollywood's golden age, she was also its most tragic symbol. A little girl turned into a commodity, her innocence sold frame by frame. Number 17. Howard Hughes, RKO's private spy master. The phone lines inside RKO's offices never slept. Secretaries swore that every conversation echoed faintly, as if another receiver was always lifted somewhere down the hall. And they were right. Howard Hughes, the aviation tycoon turned studio owner, had wired his empire with bugs, turning Hollywood into his private intelligence bureau. When Hughes seized control of RKO in 1948, he promised innovation. What he delivered was paranoia. Every script, every casting choice, every phone call became fuel for his obsession with control. He installed hidden microphones in dressing rooms, demanded daily surveillance reports on his own stars, and forced executives to undergo loyalty investigations before approving their contracts. For Hughes, filmmaking was secondary. What mattered was gathering leverage. Actresses found themselves trapped in a web of scrutiny. Jane Russell, his hand-picked discovery, later admitted that Hughes dictated not just her costumes, but her personal life. If she met another man without his approval, his private investigators appeared within hours, snapping photographs and filing reports. Hughes would brandish the evidence like shackles, ensuring obedience through humiliation. Studio employees spoke of shadowy cleanup men who followed them home. Rival producers discovered transcripts of conversations they never knew had been recorded. Even politicians were not immune. Hughes funneled his intelligence to favored allies in Washington, trading secrets for favors that shielded his empire from federal inquiries. The films RKO produced in those years bore the mark of Hughes's obsessions, endless reshoots, bizarre delays, and sudden cancellations that cost the studio millions. To the public, he was the eccentric genius who built airplanes and romanced starlets. But to those on the lot, he was a puppeteer, pulling every string with files of stolen conversations and photographs that could end careers overnight. By the mid-1950s, RKO collapsed under the weight of his paranoia, sold off for scraps. Hughes retreated into seclusion, but his surveillance machine never truly shut down. Long after his departure, stars still whispered before speaking, glancing at telephones as though his ears might still be pressed to the line. Hollywood's golden age shimmered with chandeliers and champagne, but in the shadows, secrets festered, scandals as carefully staged as the movies themselves. These stars built dreams on lies, and the glitter often hid the blood. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these hidden stories struck you the hardest? Did one revelation change the way you see a star forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know which scandal still echoes loudest for you.